Better recording it.
Oh, yeah.
Recording people, are we ready to go? Okay, then the first thing for me to say is Kalispera, everybody. I look forward to an interesting discussion. We have very distinguished speakers. Sadly, the Ambassador Serrano has to leave early because he has the misfortune of having a European Commissioner in town and he needs to look after him. Well, maybe misfortune is an exaggeration. So who do we have here? Well, we have Pedro Serrano, the EU Ambassador to London. We have Anna Koukides Prokopiou, nearly pronounced correctly, from Politea. Anastasia Dimiski from the same place as me, Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics, and Konstantin Kotsias from Bloomberg. I hope I've given you the right introductions. I'm not going to go into bibliographies or anything else. Don't have time for that. Our topic, according to the programme, is recalibrating EU-UK relations in a shifting world. I've rewritten it as an EU-UK reset with the subtitle, Substantial, Limited, or Overstated. So that's my initial provocation, just to make you think about all of this. Four observations to begin. The first is that I would say that over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a definite improvement in tone in the relations. It started with the Sunak government, and I guess some of you recall something called the Windsor Framework, which was a success of that government, at least in diminishing the Northern Ireland problem. I think it's been accentuated since the Labour administration came to power, but sometimes the perception here is that there's still obstructiveness from certain EU partners, possibly not least the Élysée Palace, with France, as always, being seen as the obstacle to making change. Second major area I would call the security and defence nexus. We have obvious common concerns, but there is the specific UK issue of dealing with the small boats, where underlying a lot of the approach that the UK has made towards Le Continent is how can we get help in stopping the small boats. Second big area, market access. There's different ways in which market access is in the process of changing. The first, as an economist, I would say, is recognition on both sides that it's lose-lose. If you obstruct market access, both sides lose, and that's one of the legacies of Brexit. But they lose from non-tariff barriers. We're all embroiled in thinking about tariffs since a new resident moved into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But at the same time, the EU's concern seems to me to be cherry-picking. The UK wants to do certain things. The EU says, well, yes, that is cherry-picking, or in Boris Johnson's terms, having your cake and eating it. And the third area I think is worth discussing is free movement. Scope for a deal. The EU wants a youth mobility scheme. The UK would like, and certainly I would very much like, an end to these ridiculous passport checks where my new blue passport is nearly full after just 4 years because I have to be stamped every time in and out of Schengen. I've ended up negotiating with passport officers. Can you get more on a page? So I'm hoping that the ambassador will give us some good news about that happening sooner rather than October. So I'll finish with just four short overarching questions. In your area of interest, this is to the panelists, is this week's real deal real progress, or is it much too vague? Second, what would you propose to take recalibration, if that's our word of the day, further? Is the drift we see both here and on the continent towards populism something that's going further to damage EU-UK relations? And very open question, what happens next? And are you optimistic or pessimistic on this not so sunny afternoon? So, Ambassador, I know you have to escape, so I'll give you the floor first. I'm holding my panelists to 5 to 6 minutes each. In contrast, I understand, to the first panel, who overshot.
Well, thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here in the Cypriot High Commission and to be discussing this in a very timely, at a very timely moment. And you said you gave us a few choices of how we describe what happened on Monday. I would definitely say it's substantial and a game changer. It is really a new chapter. Our leaders, both Prime Minister of the UK and President Costa and von der Leyen, referred to this as a new era in the relationship. And I will explain a bit what that means in practical terms and address some of the things you said. But it starts actually by acknowledging that circumstances have changed substantially in the last years. And if anything, Europe has to come closer together for its prosperity, for its security, for the defense of its values and democracy. And Europe coming closer together, bearing in mind that the European Union is a big bloc in constituting that Europe, that in addition to 27 member states, you have 10 that are candidate countries, and you have 10 other, or at least 9 others that are very closely associated. Then it's about strengthening the relationship with the UK. And the UK is not any member, it's one of the key states in the international community, permanent member of the Security Council, G7, an important military capacity, industrial capacity, know-how, universities, everything. So having a strong relationship with the United Kingdom is important for the security, for the prosperity of Europe, and for the UK. Being within Europe is vital. UK is part of the ecosystem of resilience of Europe's system of resilience, built mostly around the European Union, and most of its trade is with the European Union. 47% of the trade, goods and services of the UK are with the EU, 16-17 with the US, 6-7 with China, and it goes down. So
1 with India.
You said it. So the importance of trade with the and therefore reducing, eliminating hurdles, non-tariff barriers, as we're saying, Ian, very important in order, and will have a direct consequence for the EU. So part of what has been agreed is a vision for the relationship that takes into account the change of circumstances, a roadmap for the implementation of that vision, which needs to unfold in the chapters of security, defense, prosperity, and there are quite a few chapters within prosperity, people-to-people contact, and so important areas, and then finally a finalized agreement on creating a secure defense partnership. On the narrative side and vision side, this has been declared a strategic relationship. On concrete issues, apart from the SDP, which has concrete elements in terms of the not only enhanced cooperation between Foreign Office and the External Action Service, and regular meetings between Foreign Secretary and High Representative, and all the different elements within their departments. There's also the opening of crisis management missions and operations participation to the UK. And what is, I think, of greater interest and relevance at this stage is the possibility for the UK to participate more fully in some of the financial instruments that the European Union is deploying, not least the SAFE, Security Action for Europe, it's called, which is a credit facility of up to 150 billion euros for joint procurement and defense. With the Secure Defense Partnership, the UK can already participate in joint procurement. By the way, the SAFE regulation was adopted yesterday, so all this is going quite speedily. But it also opens the door for additional, and UK companies based in Europe can participate in those projects. It remains to have another agreement that you could not enter into if you did not have a secure defense partnership, that will open also further participation to UK companies within the UK. So I think that's a very substantial element. But there are more substantial elements. And by the way, if we hadn't looked at all this in its as a group of actions that we want to undertake, it would have been practically impossible, in my view, one action or in one sector, one agreement after another to advance. We needed that common vision to make progress. On economic side, we have agreed to, and this was a major point for the UK, an SPS agreement. If you take into account a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement for the export and import of agri-food, 60% of UK's exports in agri-food go to the EU. We have an agreement, and this will eliminate certificates, basically red tape. Which means that products will be able to transit freely between the UK and the European Union. We have agreed on fisheries. Again here, and I see the press how it portrays it in, I would say, not a very fair way. Now, this is reciprocal access to waters, so British fishermen and women can fish in EU waters and vice versa. EU fishermen and women can fish in UK waters, but it also guarantees the openness of the EU market to UK fisheries. And if you take into account that 70% of what is caught is sold in the European Union, I think, and that we have rather a turbulent trade international environment, having the guarantee that that market is open for British fish for the next 12 years, it's not a meager thing. There are more things. Energy, and this is a very important one as well, the openness to the UK of the electricity market of the European Union. The UK has a lot of potential in renewables. Having the possibility to join that European market will be a great incentive for investment and will help also lower prices, increase energy security, both in the UK and the EU. So again, a win-win situation. And of course, in terms of economy, I should have mentioned, I should have added that defense industry is going to be a great source of investment, job creation also in the next years. And again, so not only from the defense angle, but also from the economic angle, it makes a lot of sense. Security, migration, I think you referred to that as well. Enhanced cooperation on migration in many different aspects, but I know I'm running out of time, so I will not go. And I did want to mention before you cut me off, the people-to-people contact. This is seen as an EU ask. I think, again, wrong. Everywhere I go to in the UK, I get not only groups of young people, universities as well, saying, are we going to rejoin Erasmus and wanting to rejoin Erasmus? And young people and groups and civil society organizations saying, we would like to travel to the EU. And it's just for traveling, studying, working, whatever. And it has been agreed that we will be considering a scheme to allow that. You asked about e-gates, and here again, there are no legal obstacles for having transit through e-gates, but it will take more importance after the introduction of the and by the way, e-gates exist in some countries already for the access of UK visitors into Europe. Passports have to be stamped, though, and this we're going to get rid of. Once the entry-exit system enters into force, it would be entered gradually to create less distortion and suffering to all as possible. But once you've registered in the EES, you will be able to access through e-gates, and you will not have to have your passport stamped, and hopefully we will recover a better flow. We are also looking at how the UK is implementing its ETA, by the way, and to ensure that passengers or visitors from the EU can come easily to the UK, as we want UK visitors to continue coming easily and feel welcome when they do come to Europe. So I think all in all, a very ambitious program, but we have to implement it. We have to roll out additional agreements in some cases, but a new vision to the relationship, a new narrative for the relationship, a great step taken on Monday. Thank you.
Oh, deeply positive, I think. Right, Ambassador, I'm looking precisely. Do you have to leave it precisely 1:30?
I could make 1:35.
Right, in that case, I'm going to propose that we take the 3 remaining speakers, who will all be very strict on their time, leaving a couple of minutes for the Ambassador to answer the first questions from the floor. Is that acceptable? Anna.
3 LSE people on this panel, so another conspiracy brewing. So let me start by an anecdote which came to mind when I was reading what the press has been saying about the agreement on Monday. First day, I was taking a foreign policy analysis class with Margot Light, which I'm sure you know. And what do we see? Sir Humphrey, okay, giving us foreign policy lessons through, yes, minister. And of course, you know, that day, the dictum was, politics will help you survive till Friday afternoon, foreign policy will help you survive till the next century. And I would say foreign policy can't really happen unless you've got security in the mix, and this is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm all for the agreement. I do share what has been said, you know, as it's definitely a positive outcome, and the bad blood, you know, it was almost swept from the corridors of power. The bad blood between the UK and the EU. So it's a start. It's a new narrative by all means, but I don't really see the big picture being discussed. I don't really see the vision as far as security is concerned being on the table. I don't really see the strategy. What I've heard about in these past few days is about jobs, about procurement, and that's absolutely correct and absolutely, you know, on the positive side, don't get me wrong. But do we really see what's coming up for us that will lead to the next century? How can you have peace? How can you have prosperity? How can you have jobs if you don't have security? And what are we currently being faced with? The international order, a norms-based international order, is coming undone as we speak. Democracy is at threat. Are we planning to do something about it? And has the EU and the UK, have they realized that, you know, looking across the Atlantic doesn't do the trick anymore? Because the very creators of the international order after the in the post-World War II period, the Americans, I would dare say the first modern democracy of our times, despite what the Brits say about their own system of government, the Americans, don't seem to be very fond of democracy anymore. So if we talk about values, and I do still speak about values, even though it's not that fashionable anymore, if we speak about values, where is the alignment? I mean, the EU as an institution, okay, there are individual member states who may not really agree with all the European values we come to share. But if we talk about values, the alignment at this point in time is between the EU and the UK. And when we talk about security, we really need to understand, we need to perceive security in terms of an inclusive security doctrine. So you cannot separate internal security from external security anymore. So when you talk about a multiplier of security internally, you can talk about endogenous resilience, for example. And to have endogenous resilience against shocks as a society, you really need to have social cohesion. A big threat to social cohesion has been irregular migration. It has racism, xenophobia. And where does that stem from? It stems from climate change, which pushes migratory flows. It stems from people smuggling and trafficking and organized crime, which act as transactional actors. So it takes a network to fight a network. And I haven't seen at all in the discussions about the future, the unfolding future relationship between the EU and the UK, this kind of discussion about security in that term. that the UK cannot be safe, cannot be secure, unless it makes, unless there is a solid foundation to its relations with the EU, and the same is reciprocal. So this discussion has been missing, I think, from the narrative. It is something that personally worries me. And in my mind, things can only get worse before and if they get any better. So when we talk about an EU and UK deal, is all good, all the things that are on the table. Keir Starmer talked about a reset, and I do think there is a reset going on. But what has been discussed is not enough, because the vision is not there, the strategy is not there.
So I think you, in terms of my questions, you were saying overstated. Anastasia.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists and distinguished guests, it is an honor to speak today on the recalibration of EU and UK relations in a shifting world. As we navigate the complexities of post-Brexit diplomacy era, there is a need to recognize that our future depends not only on trade agreements and security pacts, but also on the movement of talent, the empowerment of youth, and the financial literacy that supports economic resilience. By embracing strategic policies in these areas, we can build a stronger and a more interconnected world. One of the defining challenges of our time is the movement of skilled professionals. The phenomenon of brain drain, where talented individuals leave their home countries for better opportunities abroad, has long been a concern for nations striving to retain their brightest minds. However, the reverse, brain gain, presents an opportunity to attract talent back home, fostering innovation and economic growth. Cyprus, for example, is actively reversing brain drain through its brain gain initiative, offering tax incentives and career opportunities to skilled professionals abroad. At the same time, the country is strengthening youth mobility by proactively reconnecting with its diaspora. President Nikos Christodoulidis has been engaging Cypriots in London, introducing incentives that encourage their return and contribution to the island's growing economy. The UK, too, must consider how it can balance the loss of EU talent with policies that encourage skilled migration. The EU's proposed Youth Mobility Scheme is a step in this direction, allowing young professionals to work and study across borders. While concerns about immigration persist, a structured, reciprocal program could provide economic benefits without compromising national policies. Closely linked to talent exchange is youth mobility, a powerful tool for fostering cross-border collaboration. The EU and UK are currently negotiating a 12-month youth experience visa, which could pave the way for thousands of young Europeans to live and work in the UK. This initiative is not about reinstating free movement, but rather about fostering cultural exchange and professional development. The UK already has similar agreements with non-EU nations, and expanding this framework to EU member states could strengthen diplomatic ties while addressing labour shortages in key industries. Beyond talent migration and youth mobility, financial literacy remains a fundamental pillar of economic resilience. Without a financially informed public, even the most well-intended monetary policies risk falling short. The European Central Bank has emphasized that financial literacy is essential for price stability and inflation expectations. Cyprus has demonstrated leadership in this area through its Financial Literacy and Education Commission. However, financial education must extend beyond basic knowledge. It should address financial exclusion, equip individuals with smart investment strategies, and safeguard them against misinformation, particularly the growing influence of social media-driven financial trends. In Europe and the UK, young people are increasingly drawn to high-risk investments and get-rich-quick schemes. Reports by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority indicate that younger investors are more likely to engage in speculative investments driven by factors such as competition, novelty, and fear of missing out. The Financial Conduct Authority's Invest Smart campaign has also warned that many treat high-risk financial decisions similarly to gambling, reinforcing the urgent need for stronger consumer protection and financial education initiatives. Crucially, the gender gap in financial literacy remains a persistent challenge. Empowering women with financial education is not only a social imperative, but also an economic necessity that strengthens participation and resilience across all demographics.
Capture the final line, please.
Yes. So, as we talk about recalibrating UK-EU relations, we must embrace forward-looking policies that encourage talent exchange, empower youth individuals, and strengthen financial literacy. The future of our economies depends on equipping individuals with the skills and opportunities necessary to thrive in an interconnected world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. I'll keep it very brief, and thank you to the introduction to speak here. And I'll make the usual qualifiers that everything I say, particularly on Brexit, which is a highly divisive and polarising issue, are made in a personal capacity and not made in a Bloomberg capacity. So to go back to your sort of threshold questions on the reset deal, substantial, limited, or overstated, and I say this really as a sort of business person, I'd say all three. And I'd say I would agree with a lot of what I've heard in terms of substantial in terms of vision and narrative and a platform to move forward. But if you really unpack the specificity of the line items that were agreed, I think it's limited. And I think in many ways, from this side of the channel, it had to be. I think if you look back at that Brexit negotiation originally and then the Brexit debate leading into the vote, people have short memories. It was highly emotive, highly divisive. And so I think it's a credit, actually, to the current, it's not a political statement, to the current administration to lay out what are, and I agree with what was said earlier on, tactical steps which could lead over the longer term to a more overarching strategic result. But so if you just, and again, very briefly, if you look at the trade and economic output, it's modest. If you look at the youth mobility things, it's tactical, but again, welcome. If you go down defence and security, travel and border facilitation, I would say the same. On fishing and some of those other issues, I think what's important again is the signalling. Compromises were made. And so to the earlier panel, building trust and creating a platform, I think, is almost more important than the specificity of what was agreed this time round. So I think good progress, substantial in terms of the path it sets. I think limited and in some instances overstated, but I think that was the nature of the beast. And I think to your final point, are we optimistic about the future, or do we think populism and some of the narratives that we've been hearing in the press? I do worry about that. I do think we're again hearing those voices that this is a sellout, this is a betrayal. And if you look at, Germany was mentioned earlier on, France, if you look at some of the populist centre, populist right and populist left, both here and abroad, I think this could continue to be a fertile area for that narrative. So I think actually, overall, both in terms of the substance and in terms of the signal, I think a really solid start. with real constraints. And I am actually hopeful that over the longer term, despite all the turbulence around, there's a platform for future success.
Thanks very much, Konstantin. As promised, therefore, we have 2 or 3 minutes to throw questions at the ambassador before he has to leave. So in this case, I'm going to open it immediately to anybody in the audience who wants to pose a question to him.
Yes, Ian, thank you. John Peter from The Economist. The real point, which I think you've all touched on, is that the constraints on this negotiation are set by the UK's red lines. And I guess my question for the ambassador really is, when you look to the future, do you think there is any chance of a softening of those red lines, and possibly also of the EU's own red line, which says you cannot have full access to the single market unless you accept all 4 freedoms? We know Northern Ireland has access to the single market without accepting the 4 freedoms. So, you know, you could be flexible that way around as well.
Go ahead and answer that one. And then anybody else who has a quick question for the ambassador, think of it quickly.
You know, I cannot really respond to you, John. I think this, and I think you phrased it, I would say I subscribe to what you say absolutely, but you phrase it very nicely, and it is a first step. It is important. It is taking into account certain constraints, but I do think it is still very substantial, and it will, it's not easy to implement because the agreements that we have to enter into will require complicated negotiations and delicate negotiations. I do think that there is the willingness to do it on both sides. Again, the way it will be welcomed in the press and some media particularly will probably be complicated as well. But I do think it takes us forward very substantially from where we were, and it does achieve one of the goals that the Labour government had given itself to conduct a reset while respecting the red lines it had set. And therefore it is going to, so I think I understand, you know, we can always say something ambitious enough or not ambitious enough, and there are many people in this country who would want a more ambitious relationship with the EU. At the same time, there are clearly people in the country which view the ambition with care. So I think all this has been taken into account. What will happen in the future? Who knows? It is an important step, and I hope it will take us further.
Any other question for the ambassador? In that case, I'm going to pose one. I said, are you pessimistic or optimistic? You've been sounding optimistic, but how do you justify that optimism? Well,
I think, you know, if you would have asked me a few months ago whether we would have such an ambitious set of agreements, and many of them agreements to agree last Monday, I would not have been sure that we would be having this, because it required also political courage to take it forward, and political courage was there, and vision in what needs to be. I think there is a vision that is clearly stated in the joint statement, that deals very much with the items that you have been raising. I do agree with you that this vision is not part of the public discourse. And so the step that has to be taken, I think, more clearly is bringing this vision into the public discourse. But the vision is there, and therefore it really has a potential for further development, and that's what gives me optimism. I also look at the reality of international life and what surrounds us. I do not see many alternatives to a stronger relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And very often the relationship is portrayed in zero-sum game terms. I think this is a huge mistake. This is win-win. What we have achieved on Monday is a win-win. I even for issues that say this is what they want, this is what we want, I think it's what we want all along. And each and every one of the items that figure in that agreement, it will benefit citizens in the United Kingdom, will benefit citizens in the European Union. At the end, our job is to benefit and to make lives of citizens better, and I think this is a step in that direction. That's why I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Well, that sounds like a very optimistic reason, and time to let you go.
Thank you very much.
So,
pleasure, and apologies for having to leave. Thank you so much.
Right, we can now continue. I hope you'll accept that I first ask a couple of questions, and then we come back to the audience for the remainder of the session. The first one I'd like to pose, I put down in terms of 2 words: likely roadblocks. We've heard about a very ambitious agenda. We know various things that may or may not be realized. Maybe this time I'll start with you, Konstantin. What would you see as the most dangerous roadblocks to, if we can use the word progress towards achieving the goals that have been articulated?
I think the politics. The politics, not just here, but also across the European Union. It is being absolutely used, as we've seen it already, and it's only a few days out, as a vehicle around which certain groups will align. So I think populist, left or right, anti-European sentiment in terms of further integration, wherever that may come from, and there's certain member states, and there are certain constituencies here. So I think the politics is unpredictable. And then I think, to the ambassador's point, I think it's implementation. I think there are some really good contours that have been laid out, but it will require some work, and it will require a degree of specificity around what the ultimate goal is. And I think if there's a shortfall on delivery, then I think that will feed into one. So I would say politics and implementation.
I'll come to you, Anna, because you mentioned the vision thing. I'm sure you recall what Helmut Schmidt had to say about vision. Anyone who has visions should see an eye doctor. So is the vision thing really a good idea in this, and what are the obstacles to realizing the vision?
Yeah, what I am worried about is that we don't have enough statesmen, stateswomen around. And this is what I refer to when I speak of vision, the big picture. So I think, in my mind, Starmer handled it quite well. I think he's going to survive Friday afternoon. It's already Thursday, and he's still there, even if he sold out the country, as the opposition says, etc., etc. He's done it well. He's been careful not to rattle too many cages, not to cross the red lines. And I'm glad, that the ambassador said there is a vision, unfolding behind closed doors. But we really can't talk about it because it's going to become counterproductive. Because the moment it gets out in the public sphere, they're going to come for the kill. So that's something that I would hold as as an optimistic suspicion as to how things will unfold. But of course, the other roadblock which I would think is going to come up is the division within the EU, and not just particularly about the relations with the UK. The situation is precarious. What does the EU stand for? Is it Macron's EU? Is it Merz who's actually calling the shots regarding the values? What does Meloni have to say, and Orban? And how are things going to unfold within the EU? So that worries me because politics overtakes policy in the world we live in, and that it makes things quite dangerous. So populism is having its field day as we speak, and although this is the beginning of I think a productive relationship, the moment that any twist and turn in the implementation, because the devil is in the detail when you're making the second tier of agreements about implementing everything. Then, if someone can use it against you for political reasons, this is what's going to happen, and it can spoil the big picture. So I'm worried about that. And if I can just add one thing, The questions I would have liked to be answered, or at least been addressed by the leadership, and hopefully they're doing it behind closed doors, is who is going to be dealing, for example, with the independence and security of Ukraine post-war? What's going to happen if Putin goes after the Baltics? Will NATO still keep the Americans in and the Russians out? Will we have like a parallel European army structure to NATO when everybody says this is not possible? So I'm just posing some questions out there because this is what worries me. And not only as an analyst, but as a former minister who had to deal with security issues. And of course, I'm speaking in my personal capacity and not representing anyone, but I am worried because we waste a lot of time within the EU framework discussing all these politics and doing these little steps towards which are tactical, and I don't see the big picture being discussed enough.
Okay, thank you. Anastasia, you set out a number of things that you'd like to see happen. What can you see as the obstacles to them?
So, yes, I'm approaching this relationship between EU and UK from an educational perspective. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not in a position to take decisions. But I want to say that it is very important to keep alive this relationship between EU and UK and allow students and professionals to have an opportunity to live abroad, and
but that's what the deal promises. What would you see getting in the way of it happening?
Again, I think it's the politics and other issues that have to be solved before giving priority to education, because I'm approaching this relationship from the educational perspective. And I think that governments do not focus that much on the opportunities that young professionals are seeking to have, but put as priority other issues as we discussed.
I think one way of putting it would be the bandwidth isn't big enough for them to cover it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try to move on to a related question, and maybe start with you this time, Anastasia. Yeah. If there's one additional thing you would like to see in a UK-EU deal, what would it be? You've seen what's been set out this week. What's your number one additional priority?
My additional priority is to make young students and professionals believe that there is future.
Yeah, that's ambitious.
Yes, and there are opportunities for them. There are opportunities to make their dreams come true, and there are job opportunities, and also opportunities for them to study abroad, because we know that international students have to pay higher fees compared to domestic students in order to study abroad, and especially in the UK. And I find it a bit unfair, and it's good, to focus more on that.
Okay,
Government,
understood.
yes.
Constantine, again with a microphone.
Keep forgetting to pick it up.
As somebody who's closer to financial markets,
Yeah, well, I would
do you
say
see something?
I would say financial markets. I do think that could be another next step where, I mean, look, the UK's unnecessarily now sort of added a significant degree of friction. The European Union has a number of initiatives, without getting too technical, to broaden and deepen their capital markets. And so I think in the short to medium term, revisiting that, it doesn't have the same emotion. It feels technical to both sets of citizens, and you've got a huge capital market here in London, and you've got an aspiration in the European Union to try and improve it. So I do think there could be some technical tweaks there that could deliver some real change and some real growth.
Anna, do you have a number one priority that you throw in?
Yes, I do, yes. On top of discussing defense in terms of procurement, and I'll put it in numbers. We've said, if the UK enters the European defense industry, we're going to have, it's expected 20% increase in output. The question is, why would we need that? So I would suggest that what is missing for the time being, at least from what is being discussed in terms of defense, is an institutionalized process of discussing security arrangements and not just discussing defense procurement.
Good, that's a very ambitious thing as well. I'm not sure there's any organizer in the room to know how much time we have, but until they start blowing a whistle, I will continue. 5 more minutes, okay. We were supposed to have an hour. We haven't got anywhere near that yet. We'll compromise on 10 at maximum. Let me ask you, Konstantina, a question, because you were castigating others who were saying this is being spread as not a good deal, which is one way of saying fake news, to quote a certain person. Do you think there's a fake news problem in the British media? Bloomberg accepted, of course.
I don't think I was castigating. I think I was just making the observation that people with legitimate views had jumped on it and perhaps exaggerated slightly. But I accept that.
I'd call that castigation.
Look, I mean, the news business now is incredibly fragmented. It's who reads a newspaper, it's online, it's on social media. This is an area where if you go into social media, it's one of those echo chambers, right? And so it is incredibly divisive and not always fact-based. So do we have a fake news problem? I'd say to a degree we do, yes. And I think, and I'm not just sort of making a plug for very reliable fact-based news organisations, but I do think there's a really important role to be played for legitimate, stood-up, fact-based editorial news reporting on both sides, so or whatever side of the debate. So I don't think it's as dramatic as in certain jurisdictions, but it's certainly an area where I think we will see more of it. At
this point, I propose to open to the floor again. Is there anybody who wants to put a question either in general or to particular panelists? Right, well, we have one here and then one there. So we'll take the two together if that's all right with you. So starting at the front and then immediately behind. Just tell us who you are and pose the question succinctly.
Will do so. I'm Anna Petridis and I'm here with Oxygen for Democracy, the organizers. And thank you for a great panel. So I want to talk about the US. So
Must you?
Sorry.
Must you?
With apologies, I'm going to jump across the pond and ask, with the new US leadership, how do we see that affecting the EU-UK relationship? We've seen EU leaders and leaders of member states which hold key positions in terms of their influence on the EU, engaging with Keir Starmer on key strategic matters. Where does the US come in all of this? And what does it mean when states such as Canada, which are geographically closer to the US, are aligning with the EU and the UK? What does that mean when it comes to the relationship between the UK and the US? Are there competing priorities?
Great question. Can you pass the microphone right behind you, please?
My name is Andreas Apostolou. I'm a master's student at LSE, Economic History, also research assistant at the Hellenic Observatory. So my question revolves around what has been said by Ms. Prokopiou about vision and the way we do things. So as a historian student, I've been exposed to things like pre-modern dynamics in Europe, but also in post-World II reconstruction, and where this vision came about and reconstructed economies. And it seems how, quoting my professor, Marius Morgan, we underwent into a transition of technocratic economics, where things like advances in technology overcame the way we do economics and the way we do policy. So my question is, do we need less technocracy in the way we do things, in the way we do economics or policy? And a follow-up question is, can we do this and can we become less technocratic and more visionary? That's my question.
Anna, I think maybe you should start with the second one.
Yes, I'll start by saying something which may sound a little bit controversial to some people. The European project, who started it? Who funded it? Who protected it? Wasn't it the Americans? Who paid for Europe to be reconstructed after the Second World War? Marshall Plan, does it ring a bell? So the post-World War order and the European Union, as it has sort of progressed through the years, was to begin with an American project. Now, the Americans have now decided to abandon both projects, according to a very important man, who, whether we like it or not, who happens to be the American president. So how does that lead to the discussion we're having here? The EU and the UK have more in common now than ever before, because not only do they share geography, not only do they share history, they also share values, and they share a world vision which is similar. That vision is no longer shared by the Americans. The values are no longer shared by the Americans, at least the official administration. So the answer to me is obvious. You need to come together because there's no one else to do this for you. And yes, the tyranny of the technocrats is a phrase which has been used in the literature to describe the experience we have from all the international institutions which sometimes behave in an overarching way and make policy instead of the politicians, making policy. But I do think if you have leadership, you can cut across the lines, the ties of technocracy and do it. It's just a matter of political will. And sometimes the political will doesn't exist or is weak because it's easier to let, an engrenage process to take over and just let things happen. So we shouldn't let things happen. Change should be a conscious decision. And to make conscious decisions, you need leaders who can take those conscious decisions.
Thank you. Anastasia, do you want to answer either question?
Yes, I want to. Of course, I will not approach it from a politics perspective, but from an educational perspective. And we know that President Trump decided to cut budgets from universities in terms of research. And I hope this will not expand to the UK and Europe as well. And I think we need to emphasize in this perspective and empower even more this relationship.
Okay, thank you. Konstantin, if Michael Bloomberg were with us today, I'm sure he did some rather tough things to say about Trump. But there's also a suggestion implicit in the question that the UK is trying to span Europe and the United States. Now, the old-fashioned way of saying this is if you sit on the fence, you get a sore backside. What's your view on this UK dilemma between the one side of the Atlantic and the other side of the English Channel?
You're right about what the boss would say, but again, I'm here in a personal capacity, so I won't go there. I think that it's a great question, and before I just sort of get to that specifically, I think, and I ran a business in the States for a while, and I think it's really important to understand that consensus, that post-war US consensus, that there is a geopolitical priority for US foreign policy, defense and economic in Europe is, if not over, fundamentally disappearing. And if you put that in context, it goes back to, well, why is Trump in the White House? And a lot of my nice East Coast, New York metropolitan friends are still fundamentally punch drunk, right? Because Donald Trump now and the Republican Party, or MAGA Party, is the party of the blue-collar working class in America. And Latinos and African Americans and young men and all those constituencies that used to be a given for the Democrat Party have disappeared and are voting Republican. And this is not, European affairs are not a priority for them. So that populist, simplistic approach, which goes to your technocratic point, is very much in favour. And, you know, subject to what happens in the midterms, I think that's what we're dealing with for some time. To your point on Starmer, I do think there is an opportunity. I mean, I hear what you say about sitting on the fence. I do think there's an opportunity, and I think actually the evidence to date would suggest the government seems to sort of be understanding how to thread that needle. Big displays of history in the White House and signatures from the King play well in the court of Donald Trump, and that's seems to have been reasonably effective, and it's actually had some concrete outcomes in terms of tariffs and discussions, but also the ability to say that maybe the British government can also act as that interlocutor back into Europe where you've lost a bit of interest. So not easy and a challenging strategic question, but I think it, on balance, is an opportunity for Britain.
Great. Well, finishing in an opportunity for Britain sounds to me like quite a good idea. So I do have one last comment to make on Canada, which you mentioned, which is that the 51st state, as somebody would like to rename it, in fact has far closer, not just economic relationships, but is a closer socio-economic model to the European Union than it is to the United States. The welfare state is a phenomenon in Canada which you could recognise from a European lens. So I think that's also important. Also, if you think about it, they're closer to Greenland. So if anybody's going to take over Greenland, why not Canada? So on that note, under the careful eye of the organisers, can I ask you to thank the panellists on my behalf? And I think I saw some lunch being set out outside. Is that correct as well?
So thank you very much for another very interesting and lively panel. And as we conclude today's forum, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to all our speakers, moderators, and audience members, both in person and online. Your voices, ideas, and patience made this event not just meaningful, but hopefully impactful. Special thanks goes to our partners and supporters. And most importantly, I would like to thank the High Commissioner, Mr. Kouros, and of course, Melivia Dimitriou, for the excellent collaboration we've had for the second year in a row. Cyprus from London continues to demonstrate the value of transnational dialogue, diaspora engagement, and strategic partnership. And we look forward to building on today's discussions and working with all of you to shape a better future for Cyprus, the UK, and beyond. We hope to see you again next year, and please enjoy the lunch outside. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.